The blood-red sunset cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Fort Sumner, as Naomi Davis stood frozen on her porch, clutching her sister's handkerchief, the last trace of Eleanor that remained after she'd vanished 3 days ago without a word or warning. The embroidered cloth trembled in Naomi's grip, as the terrible silence of the empty house behind her pressed against her back like a physical weight. Fort Sumner, New Mexico Territory, 1878, was no place for a woman alone. Especially not now, with whispers of outlaws roaming the borderlands and rumors of settlers disappearing without a trace. The town had grown since the war, but the vast expanses of wilderness surrounding it remained untamed, dangerous, and indifferent to human suffering. Miss Davis. Sheriff Wilkins's voice pulled her from her thoughts. Still no word. Naomi shook her head, the movement causing a strand of chestnut hair to escape her hasty bun. Nothing. She wouldn't just leave, Sheriff. Something's happened to her. The older man shifted uncomfortably, his weathered face betraying his skepticism. Your sister's a grown woman, 22 years old. Perhaps she, Eleanor, wouldn't leave me, Naomi interrupted, her voice sharp with conviction. At 20 herself, Naomi had never spent more than a day apart from her sister since their parents died 5 years ago. Not without saying something. Not without taking her silver locket or her good boots. Something's wrong. Sheriff Wilkins sighed, removing his hat to run a hand through thinning gray hair. I've sent telegrams to Santa Fe and Las Cruces. Asked the station master if she bought passage. No one's seen her. And the search parties. Found nothing west of town. We'll try north tomorrow, but... His voice trailed off, the unspoken truth hanging between them. Resources were limited, and a single missing woman wasn't a priority in a territory where death visited regularly. Naomi clutched the porch railing, knuckles whitening. I understand. But understanding didn't ease the hollow ache spreading through her chest. Eleanor was more than a sister. She was Naomi's only family, her confidante, her strength during the harsh years following their parents' death from fever. The thought of never seeing her sister's smile again was unbearable. As the sheriff departed with promises that rang empty to her ears, Naomi noticed a lone rider approaching from the east. The setting sun outlined his silhouette tall, broad-shouldered, sitting easy in the saddle despite what appeared to be a long journey. His horse, a magnificent dappled gray, kicked up dust that glowed golden in the fading light. Something about the stranger's deliberate pace as he rode directly toward her home made Naomi reach for the small derringer she kept hidden in her skirt pocket. Fort Sumner saw its share of drifters, and not all had honorable intentions. The rider stopped at her gate, and in the deepening twilight, Naomi could make out a face partly shadowed by his hat brim strong-jawed, with several days' worth of stubble and eyes that seemed to hold the same intensity as the distant mountains. Not a young man, but not old either, perhaps 30 or so, with the weathered look of someone who'd lived every one of those years fully. "Evening, madam," he called, his voice deep and clear. "Would you be Miss Naomi Davis?" Her fingers tightened around the derringer. "Who's asking?" He dismounted in one fluid motion, removing his hat to reveal thick dark hair with a touch of silver at the temples. "Name's Owen Calloway. I believe I might have information about your sister." Naomi's heart lurched painfully in her chest. "Eleanor, you've seen her." "Not exactly." He approached slowly, respectfully stopping at the bottom of the porch steps. "I've been tracking a group of men moving east toward the Texas border. They've been taking women from settlements across the territory. When I heard about your sister in town just now, I thought there might be a connection." Hope and fear twisted together inside her. "What men? Why would they take Eleanor?" Owen Calloway's expression darkened. "They're selling them, Miss Davis." to mining camps and worse places where women are scarce. Naomi swayed slightly, grateful for the railing supporting her. "Dear God, the good news," he continued, "is that I know their routes, their hideouts. If your sister was taken by the same men I've been trailing, there's a chance she's still alive. The sheriff's organizing search parties, but they haven't found anything," Naomi said, studying the stranger's face for any sign of deception. "Why should I believe you can do better?" A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Because I've been hunting men like these for 3 years, I know their patterns, and because I've brought back 5 women to their families already. Are you a lawman? Was U.S. Marshal out of Arizona Territory until 75. Something flickered across his face, a shadow of old pain. "Now I work on my own." "As what? A bounty hunter?" Naomi had heard stories about such men, brutal, mercenary figures who cared more for coin than justice. Call it a personal mission. He stepped closer, and in the last light of day, Naomi saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch, a burning determination that seemed to pierce through pretense. "Miss Davis, I can't promise miracles, but I give you my word. If your sister can be found, I will bring her home." The simple declaration, spoken with such quiet certainty, broke through the wall of despair that had been building inside Naomi since Eleanor's disappearance. Before she could respond, Owen continued, "I'll be leaving at first light tomorrow. The trail's already growing cold." "I'm coming with you," Naomi said, the words escaping before she could consider their implications. Owen shook his head. "Where I'm going is no place for she's my sister." Naomi cut him off, stepping down from the porch to stand directly before him. Even with the height of the bottom step, she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. "I won't sit here waiting, wondering if you found her, if she's alive or—" She couldn't finish the thought. "I'm coming. It'll be dangerous, rough country, rougher men." "I can ride as well as any man in this town," Naomi countered. "I can shoot straight enough to put food on our table. And I know my sister better than anyone, her voice, her habits. I might notice things you'd miss." Owen studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the gathering darkness. Finally, he nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement. "Pack light. 1 bag. Wear practical clothes, trousers if you have them. Bring whatever weapon you own and be ready before sunrise." "I will be," Naomi promised. As Owen turned to leave, a sudden thought struck her. "Mr. Calloway, why are you doing this? Helping strangers, hunting these men?" He paused, one hand on his saddle horn, and for a moment Naomi thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that suggested the words were rarely spoken aloud. 3 years ago, my wife was taken by men like these. I found her too late." He swung himself back onto his horse with practiced ease. "No one should have to bury a sister the way I buried my Caroline." Before Naomi could respond, he touched his hat brim in farewell and turned his horse toward town, leaving her standing in the deepening twilight with a strange mixture of dread and hope pulsing through her veins. That night, sleep eluded Naomi. She moved through the small house she shared with Eleanor like a ghost, packing and repacking her saddlebag, checking her father's old Remington revolver, and laying out her riding clothes. Every corner of the home echoed with Eleanor's absence, the empty rocking chair by the stove where she would sit mending in the evenings, the silent piano, whose keys no longer rang with her sister's favorite hymns. By the time the eastern sky began to lighten with the first hint of dawn, Naomi was dressed in her split riding skirt, sturdy boots, and a man's shirt she'd altered to fit her frame. Her hair was braided severely down her back, and her father's old hat, too large but necessary for the harsh sun, sat ready by the door. When she heard the soft approach of hoofbeats, she stepped onto the porch, locking the door behind her. Owen Calloway appeared like a specter in the pre-dawn light, leading not only his gray but a second horse, a compact, sturdy chestnut mare. "Borrowed her from the livery," he explained, noting Naomi's questioning look. "Figured your mount might need rest after the first few days." Naomi strapped her belongings behind the saddle of her own horse, a reliable bay gelding named Copper that had belonged to her father. "I didn't expect such consideration." Something that might have been amusement flickered in Owen's eyes. "Don't mistake preparation for kindness, Miss Davis. We'll be making hard miles today." True to his word, Owen set a grueling pace as they headed east out of Fort Sumner. The sun had barely cleared the horizon when the last signs of civilization disappeared behind them, replaced by the vast, unforgiving landscape of the high plains transitioning into the Llano Estacado. They rode mostly in silence, stopping only briefly to rest the horses and take sparse meals of jerky and hardtack. By midday, Naomi's muscles ached from the constant motion, but she gritted her teeth against the discomfort, determined not to give Owen any reason to regret bringing her along. "How do you know which way to go?" she finally asked as they paused at a small spring to water the horses. "The territory's vast. They could have gone anywhere." Owen crouched by the water, examining something Naomi couldn't see. Men moving with captives leave different signs than ordinary travelers. They avoid towns, take less used trails. And this particular group has a pattern. They gather women from settlements, then move them east to the Texas border where they have buyers waiting. "Buyers," Naomi repeated, the word bitter on her tongue. Owen straightened, wiping his hands on his trousers. "Some go to mining camps or remote ranches, others to places in larger towns where men pay for female company." His eyes met hers, unflinching. "I won't soften the truth for you, Miss Davis. What these men do is brutal business. I'm not made of porcelain, Mr. Calloway. I understand the world has darkness in it." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "3 days ago a group passed this way, 5 horses at least. One was carrying double weight." He pointed to barely perceptible depressions in the sandy soil near the spring. "They camped here, probably the night your sister went missing." Hope surged in Naomi's chest. "Then we're on the right trail." "It's a trail," Owen cautioned. "Whether it's the right one remains to be seen." As they mounted up to continue, Naomi asked the question that had been pressing on her mind since dawn. "How did you find me? Why Fort Sumner?" Owen didn't answer immediately, adjusting his saddle before responding. "I was already tracking this group when I heard rumors in Las Vegas about a woman gone missing from Fort Sumner. It matched their pattern: small settlements, young women living without much protection. Eleanor and I have managed fine on our own for 5 years, Naomi said, a defensive edge creeping into her voice. "I'm sure you have," Owen replied, his tone neutral. "But to men like these, 2 women alone might as well be wearing targets." They rode through the afternoon, the landscape gradually changing from scrubland to more broken country, rocky outcroppings and shallow canyons that offered occasional shelter from the relentless sun. Naomi fought against exhaustion, determined to keep pace with Owen's tireless rhythm. As twilight approached, Owen led them into a sheltered draw where a small stand of cottonwoods suggested the presence of water. "We'll camp here," he announced, swinging down from his saddle with a grace that belied the long hours of riding. Naomi dismounted less elegantly, her legs nearly buckling as they took her weight. She busied herself caring for Copper, unsaddling him and rubbing him down before seeing to her own comfort, aware of Owen's assessing gaze. "You ride well," he commented as he built a small, smokeless fire. "Better than most women I've known." "My father taught us both," Naomi replied, unrolling her bedroll on the opposite side of the fire. "After our mother died, he raised us more like sons than daughters, said we needed to be able to survive in this country without depending on men's protection." A ghost of a smile touched Owen's lips. Wise man. They ate a simple meal of beans warmed over the fire and more jerky. As night settled fully around them, Naomi found herself studying Owen's face in the flickering light. The stern lines seemed to soften slightly in repose, though his eyes remained alert, constantly scanning their surroundings. "You should get some rest," he said, catching her gaze. "I'll take first watch." "I'm not sure I can sleep," Naomi admitted. "Not while wondering where Eleanor is, what she's enduring." Owen was silent for a long moment. "Hope is necessary, Miss Davis, but don't torture yourself with imaginings. Focus on what we can do, follow the trail, keep moving forward." "Is that how you managed, after your wife?" The question hung in the air between them, and Naomi immediately regretted her boldness. Owen's expression closed like a shutter over a window, all trace of warmth vanishing. "I didn't manage," he said finally, his voice so low she had to lean forward to hear it. "I broke. Then I decided to make sure it didn't happen to anyone else." He picked up his rifle, a signal that the conversation was over. "Get some sleep. We leave before dawn." Despite her certainty that sleep would be impossible, exhaustion claimed Naomi soon after she wrapped herself in her blanket. Her last conscious thought was of Eleanor's face, not frightened as she'd been imagining, but smiling, confident that her sister would find her. Naomi woke to Owen's hand on her shoulder. The world around them still shrouded in darkness, except for the faintest gray lightening of the eastern horizon. "Time to move," he said simply, already packed and ready. They ate cold biscuits in the saddle as the sun rose, painting the landscape in shades of gold and amber. By mid-morning they reached a narrow canyon where the trail they'd been following converged with a larger path. Owen dismounted, examining the ground carefully. They met with others here. The group's bigger now, 7, maybe 8 riders. "Is that good or bad for us?" Naomi asked, wiping dust from her face with a bandana. "Depends. Bigger group moves slower, leaves more signs. But also means more guns if we catch up to them." He glanced at her, his expression grim. "And it suggests they've taken more women than just your sister." The reality of what they were pursuing settled heavily on Naomi's shoulders, not just Eleanor's fate, but potentially others as well. "How far ahead do you think they are?" 2 days, maybe less if they're slowed by difficult captives. Owen swung back into his saddle. "We need to make better time." They pushed harder that day, stopping only when necessary. The terrain grew more rugged, forcing them to navigate steep ravines and rocky slopes that slowed their progress despite their urgency. By late afternoon, dark clouds had gathered on the horizon, and the air took on the electric quality that preceded a storm. "We need shelter," Owen called over the rising wind. "There's a lined shack about 3 miles ahead if my memory serves." The first fat raindrops were falling as they crested a ridge, and Naomi spotted the small structure nestled against a cliff face below. By the time they reached it, the rain was coming down in sheets, turning the ground to mud that sucked at the horses' hooves. The shack was abandoned but still relatively sound, a single room with a stone fireplace, rough plank floor, and a roof that leaked only in the corners. Owen busied himself starting a fire while Naomi tended to the horses in the lean-to attached to one side of the structure. Inside, she found Owen had managed to coax a decent blaze from the fireplace, using wood stacked neatly against the wall. The small space was already warming, the fire's light creating a sphere of comfort against the storm's fury outside. "Whose place is this?" Naomi asked, wringing water from her braid. "Used to belong to the Barton Ranch before the war," Owen replied, hanging his wet coat near the fire. Old man Barton's been gone for years, but the line shacks remain. Shelter for anyone who needs it. Naomi sank down on a rough bench, suddenly overwhelmed by the enormity of their task. "Do you really think we'll find her?" she asked, voicing the fear that had been growing inside her. "The territory's so vast, and they have such a head start." Owen regarded her steadily across the fire. "I've learned to make no promises in this life, Miss Davis, but I've also learned that giving up guarantees failure." He paused, then added more gently, "We're on their trail." "That's more than most get." "How many?" Naomi asked quietly. "How many were you too late for? Besides your wife," something flickered in his eyes, pain perhaps, or anger. "3 that I know of, 2 more I never found at all. And the men who take them," his expression hardened. 15 that won't be taking anyone else." The blunt statement should have shocked her, but Naomi felt only a cold satisfaction. "Good," she said simply. Owen studied her face, perhaps searching for judgment or horror and finding none. "You should try to dry those clothes," he said finally, turning away. "I'll step outside while you change." Despite her protests that the rain made such gallantry pointless, Owen insisted, leaving her alone to strip off her sodden outer garments and hang them by the fire. She kept on her thin cotton shift, wrapping herself in a blanket from her saddlebag before calling him back in. Owen returned, somehow having found time to check the horses despite the downpour. He carried a small leather flask which he offered to her. "Whiskey," he explained. "Medicinal purposes only." Naomi hesitated only briefly before accepting it, taking a small sip that burned down her throat and bloomed warmly in her chest. "Thank you." As the storm raged outside, they shared a meager supper of salt pork and the last of the biscuits. The confined space forced a proximity that made Naomi acutely aware of Owen as a man, rather than merely a guide on their desperate journey. His presence filled the small room not threateningly, but with a quiet intensity that drew her attention whenever she thought he wasn't looking. "Tell me about Eleanor," he said unexpectedly as they finished eating. "Knowing the person we're looking for sometimes helps." Naomi's throat tightened at the simple request. "She's everything I'm not," she began softly. "Gentle, patient. She can coax music from that old piano like it's a living thing, makes friends with everyone she meets." A small smile touched her lips at the memories. "Papa used to say I got all the fight and Eleanor got all the grace." "You seem to have your share of grace," Owen observed. Naomi felt a flush rise to her cheeks, unexpectedly warmed by the simple compliment. Not compared to her. Eleanor never raises her voice, never speaks ill of others. She keeps a garden that feeds half the widows in town come harvest time. She sounds remarkable. She is. Naomi stared into the fire, fighting back tears. She deserved better than this, better than me failing to protect her. "You haven't failed," Owen said firmly. "You're out here, aren't you, riding through storms, sleeping on hard ground, pushing forward when most would have given up already." "It's not enough," Naomi whispered. "It never is," Owen agreed, surprising her with his candor. "But it's all we can do, keep moving forward, keep trying." He reached for more wood to feed the fire, the motion causing the collar of his shirt to gap slightly, revealing a glimpse of scarred flesh across his shoulder. Naomi's eyes widened. "You're wounded." Owen adjusted his shirt, covering the mark. "Old injury. Apache arrow 6 years back." "You fought Apache?" "Sometimes. Sometimes rode with them." At her startled look, he elaborated, "I scouted for the army after the war, learned their language, their ways, found I had more in common with them than I expected." "Is that why you left the marshals?" Owen was silent for so long Naomi thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he said, I left because I couldn't be the kind of lawman they wanted, one who enforced unjust laws when it suited powerful men. He prodded the fire, sending sparks up the chimney. The badge began to feel more like a shackle than a shield. The rain continued through the night, drumming on the roof as they took turns keeping watch, though Naomi suspected Owen barely slept during his rest periods. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving behind a washed-clean world and skies of brilliant blue. "The rain will have affected the trail," Owen said as they saddled the horses, "but it might slow them down to wet ground, swollen streams." "How far to the border?" Naomi asked, securing her bedroll. 2 days' hard ride, maybe less. If I'm right about where they're heading, they'll cross near the Pecos Bend, then head for a trading post called Harker's Crossing. "What's there?" Owen's face darkened. "A man named Silas Harker trades in anything that brings profit: whiskey, weapons, women. I've been trying to get enough evidence against him for years, but he's careful, connected." They rode out as the sun cleared the horizon, following a trail that, to Naomi's untrained eye, seemed to have vanished with the rain. But Owen moved with confidence, occasionally dismounting to examine tracks only he could see or point out broken branches and disturbed stones that told the story of recent passage. Around midday, they came upon the remains of a camp: cold ashes of a fire and discarded food tins. Owen circled the site slowly, reading the signs with a tracker's precision. "They spent the night here, probably during the worst of the storm," he said, crouching to examine something in the mud. 8 men, at least 3 women." 3? Naomi's heart raced. "You're sure?" Owen pointed to different sets of smaller footprints, partly preserved in a patch of mud protected by an overhang. Different sized feet, different walking patterns. One limp slightly favors her right leg. "That could be Eleanor," Naomi said quickly. "She broke her ankle as a child. It never healed quite right." Hope and dread mingled in her chest as Owen continued his examination of the site. Finally, he straightened, a small object in his hand. "Found this caught in a bush over there," he said, extending his palm toward her. Naomi's breath caught. In his hand lay a small silver button engraved with a delicate flower pattern identical to those on Eleanor's favorite blue dress. She reached for it with trembling fingers. "It's hers," she whispered. "She was wearing that dress the day she disappeared." Owen's expression softened momentarily. "Then we know we're on the right trail." "How long ago were they here?" "Last night. We're gaining on them." He glanced at the sky. "They can't be more than half a day ahead now." They pushed the horses hard that afternoon, following a trail that grew more distinct as the ground dried, and the kidnappers grew less cautious, perhaps believing themselves beyond pursuit. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Owen called a halt on a ridge overlooking a broad valley. "There," he said, pointing to a distant plume of dust moving slowly across the landscape below. "That's them." Naomi strained her eyes, making out tiny dark figures against the golden landscape, riders moving in a tight formation. "What now? Can we catch them before nightfall?" Owen shook his head. "Too risky. They outnumber us, and a direct confrontation puts the captives in danger." He studied the terrain ahead. "They'll make camp soon. We'll close the gap overnight, then watch for an opportunity." True to Owen's prediction, the distant riders halted as twilight approached, making camp in a copse of trees beside what appeared to be a small stream. Owen led Naomi on a circuitous route that brought them to a vantage point on a rocky outcropping above the camp, close enough to observe but hidden from casual detection. Through Owen's field glass, Naomi could make out the camp's layout: 8 men gathered around a fire, with 3 female figures seated together at the edge of the light, their wrists bound. Even at this distance, Naomi immediately recognized Eleanor's slender form and the distinctive way she held her head. "It's her," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "The one in the blue dress. That's Eleanor." Owen studied the camp carefully. "They've posted guards, one to the north, one west. They're being cautious." "What's our plan?" Naomi asked, her fingers instinctively checking her father's revolver. "We wait until the camp settles for the night," Owen replied, his voice low and steady. "Most will sleep. The guards will grow less vigilant as the hours pass. Then I move in, free the women, and we slip away before they realize what's happening." "I'm coming with you," Naomi insisted. Owen gave her a measured look. "You'll wait here with the horses. If something goes wrong, you ride hard for Fort Sumner, find the sheriff." "That wasn't our agreement." "Our agreement was that I would bring your sister home," Owen countered, his voice hardening. "I can't do that if I'm worrying about your safety too." Naomi wanted to argue further but recognized the cold logic in his words. "Fine," she conceded reluctantly. "But if you're not back within 2 hours of entering that camp, I'm coming after you." A faint smile touched Owen's lips. "I believe you would." He turned his attention back to the camp below. Now we wait. The hours passed with excruciating slowness as darkness settled fully over the land. The camp below grew quieter as men retired to their bedrolls, until only the guards and a single figure tending the fire remained awake. The women had been moved to a spot beneath a large tree, still visible in the dying firelight. "It's time," Owen said finally, checking his revolver before securing it in his holster. He had removed his spurs and anything else that might make noise, and his face was grim with purpose. 2 hours, like you said. If I'm not back, ride east until you hit the Picos, then follow it south to the nearest settlement." "Bring her back," Naomi said simply, unable to express the tumult of emotions churning inside her. Owen nodded once, then melted into the darkness like a shadow, moving with the silent precision of a mountain lion. Naomi lost sight of him almost immediately, left alone with only the distant flicker of the kidnapper's fire and the slow progression of stars across the night sky to mark the passing time. Minutes stretched like hours as she strained her eyes watching the camp below, trying to discern any movement, any sign of Owen's progress. A soft whinny from one of the horses startled her, and she quickly moved to quiet the animal, terrified that the sound might carry to the camp. When she returned her attention to the scene below, she noticed with a jolt that one of the guards was missing from his post. Alarm coursed through her veins as she scanned the camp desperately, wondering if Owen had been discovered. The sharp crack of a gunshot shattered the night's stillness, followed immediately by shouts of alarm from the camp. Naomi's heart hammered against her ribs as more shots followed, the muzzle flashes briefly illuminating chaotic movement below. "No," she whispered, reaching for her revolver. Owen's plan had clearly gone awry, and whatever promise she'd made, she couldn't remain safely hidden while Eleanor remained in danger. Leaving the horses tethered, Naomi picked her way down the rocky slope as quickly as she dared, using the confusion in the camp to cover her approach. As she neared the perimeter, she could make out figures running, the sounds of struggle, men shouting contradictory orders. A flicker of movement to her right made her whirl, raising her revolver instinctively, only to find herself face to face with a woman in a torn dress, eyes wide with terror. "Please," the woman gasped, "help me." Not Eleanor, Naomi realized, but one of the other captives. "Where are the others?" she demanded urgently. "My sister, blonde hair, blue dress." "The man told us to run," the woman replied, her voice trembling. "We scattered." "I don't know where." Another shot rang out closer this time, cutting off her words. Naomi made a split-second decision. "Head that way," she instructed, pointing toward where she'd left the horses. "Stay hidden, wait for us." Without waiting for a response, Naomi continued toward the camp, moving from shadow to shadow, her heart in her throat. The gunfire had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence broken only by the occasional snap of the still burning campfire. She froze as a man's voice carried through the darkness, rough, angry. "You've caused me a lot of trouble, Calloway. More than you're worth." Owen's reply was too low to make out, but the pain evident in his tone sent a chill down Naomi's spine. Edging closer, she finally spotted them, Owen on his knees at the edge of the firelight, blood darkening one sleeve, with a large bearded man standing over him, pistol aimed at his head. Two other men flanked their leader, weapons drawn. Of Eleanor and the third captive, there was no sign. "Where are the women?" the bearded man demanded, pressing the gun barrel against Owen's temple. "Gone," Owen replied, his voice steady despite his position. "Far beyond your reach by now, Harker." Silas Harker, the man Owen had mentioned, the traitor who dealt in human lives. Naomi's finger tightened on her trigger as she assessed the situation. 3 against 1, and Owen already wounded. The odds were terrible, but she couldn't see an alternative. Just as she was preparing to step from cover and create a diversion, a scream pierced the night, a woman's voice from somewhere behind the camp. Eleanor's voice. Harker turned toward the sound, momentarily distracted, and Owen moved with explosive speed despite his injury, driving his shoulder into the larger man's midsection. The gun discharged harmlessly into the air as both men crashed to the ground. Naomi seized the moment, stepping from cover and firing at one of the other men. Her shot went wide, but the unexpected attack sent both men diving for cover, buying Owen precious seconds to grapple for Harker's weapon. "Run!" Owen shouted, clearly stunned to see her but recovering quickly. "Find Eleanor." Naomi hesitated only briefly before turning toward where she'd heard her sister's cry. She sprinted past the fire, into the darkness beyond the camp, calling Eleanor's name. "Naomi!" The response came from her left, near the stream. "Help!" Following the sound, Naomi rounded a thicket of brush to find Eleanor struggling with a man who had her pinned against a tree, his hand clamped over her mouth. Without hesitation, Naomi raised her revolver and fired. The man jerked as the bullet struck him in the shoulder, his grip on Eleanor loosening enough for her to break free. He reached for a knife at his belt, but Naomi fired again, and this time he collapsed, clutching his thigh. Eleanor flung herself into Naomi's arms, trembling violently. "You came," she sobbed against her sister's shoulder. "You found me." "Of course I did," Naomi whispered fiercely, clutching Eleanor as if she might vanish again. But the reunion was short-lived. More gunshots from the direction of the camp reminded them of the danger still present. "Owen," Naomi said urgently, pulling back to examine her sister quickly for injuries. Finding nothing immediately life-threatening, she grabbed Eleanor's hand. "Can you run?" Eleanor nodded shakily. "Who's Owen?" "The man who helped me find you. He's in trouble." Naomi led her sister back toward the camp, stopping in the shelter of a large boulder. "Stay here. If I'm not back in 5 minutes, head that way," she pointed toward their horses, "and keep going until you find a rocky outcropping. There's another woman waiting there." "Naomi, no, I won't lose him after coming this far," Naomi said firmly, the intensity of her own words surprising her. "Trust me, Eleanor, please." Something in her expression must have convinced her sister, for Eleanor nodded reluctantly. "Be careful." Naomi approached the camp cautiously, revolver ready. The scene that greeted her was one of carnage. 2 bodies lay motionless near the fire, and signs of struggle were evident in the trampled earth and overturned supplies. Of Owen and Harker, there was no immediate sign. A low groan drew her attention to the far side of the clearing. Approaching carefully, she found Owen propped against a tree trunk, one hand pressed to a bleeding wound in his side, the other still gripping his revolver. "Naomi," he rasped, genuine surprise in his eyes. "You should be gone by now." "I told you I wouldn't leave without you," she replied, kneeling beside him to examine his injuries. Besides the bullet wound to his arm that she'd noticed earlier, he had a deep gash across his ribs and what appeared to be a knife wound in his left thigh. "Can you walk?" "Have to," he grunted, struggling to rise. "Harker got away, he'll bring reinforcements." Naomi slipped her shoulder under his arm, helping him to his feet. "Eleanor's waiting, I found her." Despite his pain, genuine relief washed over Owen's features. "Good," he breathed. "That's good." Together they made their way back to where Eleanor waited, then slowly, painfully, up the slope toward the horses. The other escaped woman, who introduced herself as Rebecca Miller, taken from a homestead near Las Cruces, helped support Eleanor, whose ordeal had left her weak and shaking. "We need to keep moving," Owen insisted as Naomi attempted to bind his wounds. "Harker won't give up easily, not after losing his merchandise." The reminder of how the kidnappers viewed the women sent a wave of cold fury through Naomi, but she focused on the immediate problem. "You're in no condition to ride far." "I've ridden with worse," Owen replied grimly. "There's a settlement about 15 miles southeast Coldwater Creek. Small place, but they have a doctor of sorts." With considerable difficulty, they got everyone mounted, Owen sharing Naomi's horse while she rode double with Eleanor, and Rebecca on the spare mount. They set out under the light of a setting moon, moving as quickly as the rough terrain and their injuries would allow. Owen's condition deteriorated as they rode, his body growing heavier against Naomi's back, his breathing becoming increasingly labored. By the time the first hint of dawn touched the eastern horizon, he was barely conscious, held in the saddle only by Naomi's arm locked around his waist. "Stay with me, Owen," she murmured, feeling the alarming warmth of fever radiating from his body. "We're almost there." Coldwater Creek proved to be little more than a cluster of buildings around a trading post. But as promised, it had someone with medical knowledge, a grizzled former Army surgeon named Dr. Whitaker, who took one look at their blood-stained party and ushered them immediately into his small clinic. "Bullet needs to come out," he pronounced after examining Owen, who had finally lost consciousness during the last mile of their journey. "And these other wounds need proper cleaning before infection sets in worse than it already has." While the doctor worked on Owen, Naomi saw to Eleanor and Rebecca, helping them bathe and change into clean clothes provided by the doctor's wife. Eleanor's physical injuries were relatively minor bruises, rope burns on her wrists, a sprained ankle, but the shadow in her eyes spoke of deeper wounds that would take longer to heal. "They came at night," Eleanor recounted softly as Naomi combed tangles from her sister's hair. "I'd gone to the shed behind the house to get preserves for breakfast. Someone grabbed me from behind, covered my mouth. I couldn't even scream." Her voice broke. "There were 3 of them. They tied me, gagged me, threw me over a horse like a sack of flour." Naomi's hands stilled, rage and grief twisting together in her chest. "You don't have to talk about it now." "I want to," Eleanor insisted. "I need to." She drew a shaky breath. "There were other women, Rebecca, and a girl named Sarah from somewhere near Santa Fe. They said they were taking us to Texas, that someone would pay good money for us." "Did they hurt you?" Naomi asked, the question she'd been dreading since finding her sister. Eleanor shook her head. "Not like that. Harker forbade it, said damaged goods brought lower prices." The clinical description of their intended fate made Naomi's stomach turn. "But they weren't gentle, and they made it clear what would happen once we were sold." Naomi pulled her sister into a fierce embrace. "It's over now, you're safe." "Because of you," Eleanor whispered. "And that man, Owen. He risked everything for strangers." "Not complete strangers," Naomi corrected softly. "He knew what you were enduring. His wife was taken by men like these once." Eleanor drew back, searching her sister's face. "There's something in your eyes when you speak of him," she observed. "Something I've never seen before." Naomi looked away, unwilling to examine the emotions that had taken root during their journey together. "He's a good man who did a brave thing, that's all." But even as she spoke the words, she knew they were not entirely truthful. In the space of 3 days, Owen Calloway had become more than a guide, more than a rescuer. The thought of losing him to his wounds created an ache in her chest that couldn't be explained by mere gratitude. Dr. Whitaker emerged from the surgery room as the sisters talked, his apron stained with blood but his expression cautiously optimistic. "Got the bullet out," he reported. "Cleaned the other wounds as best I could. He's young and strong, which helps, but he's lost a lot of blood, and there's some infection already set in. The next day or two will tell the tale." "May I see him?" Naomi asked, rising from Eleanor's side. The doctor nodded. "He's unconscious, but talking to him might help. Sometimes they can hear even when they can't respond." Owen lay still and pale on a narrow cot, his broad chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Bandages wrapped his upper arm and torso, and his skin had the unnatural flush of fever. Naomi pulled a chair beside the bed and took his hand, alarmed by the heat radiating from it. "You promised to bring Eleanor home," she said softly. "And you did. But I need you to make me another promise now that you'll fight through this, that you'll come back." She brushed a lock of dark hair from his forehead. "Because I'm beginning to think my home might not be a place anymore. It might be a person." For 3 days, Owen's life hung in the balance as fever raged through his body. Naomi rarely left his side, bathing his face with cool cloths, changing his bandages, talking to him about anything and everything: her childhood, her dreams, the life in Fort Sumner that suddenly seemed distant and incomplete. Eleanor and Rebecca recovered their strength more quickly, helping the doctor's wife with chores around the small settlement while they waited for Owen's condition to improve. On the evening of the 3rd day, as Naomi dozed in the chair beside Owen's bed, his fingers tightened around hers. "Naomi," he murmured, his voice hoarse from disuse. She jerked awake, leaning forward eagerly. "Owen, can you hear me?" His eyes opened slowly, focusing on her face with effort. "You're still here." "Of course I am," she replied, blinking back tears of relief. "Someone had to make sure you kept your promise." A ghost of his old smile touched his lips. "Eleanor, safe, recovering well, Rebecca too." She reached for a cup of water, helping him take small sips. "Harker got away, but the local sheriff has sent telegrams to every settlement within 50 miles with descriptions of him and his men." Owen relaxed slightly against the pillows. "Good." His eyes, though tired, were clearer now, the fever finally broken. "You should have gone home." "Not without you," Naomi said simply. Something shifted in Owen's expression, a softening, a vulnerability he had not allowed himself to show before. "Why?" Naomi hesitated, the words she wanted to say suddenly caught in her throat. Before she could gather her courage, the door opened as Dr. Whitaker entered for his evening check. "Well now," the doctor said, pleased surprise evident in his voice. "Look who's decided to rejoin the land of the living." The moment between them passed as the doctor examined Owen's wounds and pronounced himself cautiously satisfied with his progress. "Another week of rest and you might be fit to travel," he concluded, "provided you don't do anything foolish in the meantime." When they were alone again, Owen seemed more guarded, the brief openness gone from his expression. You and Eleanor should head back to Fort Sumner, he said. I'll follow when I'm able. We're not leaving you, Naomi replied firmly. Besides, the doctor says you'll need help traveling, even once your fever's completely gone. I've managed on my own before. You don't have to anymore, Naomi said, the simple truth of the words resonating in the quiet room. Not if you don't want to. Owen studied her face for a long moment, something unreadable in his eyes. What are you saying, Naomi? She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. I'm saying that sometimes we find what we need in the most unexpected places. That sometimes a search for one thing leads us to another, equally precious. I'm not a whole man, Owen said quietly. What happened with Caroline, it broke something in me that may never fully heal. I'm not asking for pieces of you that no longer exist, Naomi replied. Just for the chance to know the man who is here now, the one who kept his word, who risked everything to save my sister, who taught me that courage isn't about fearlessness, but about moving forward despite fear. Owen reached for her hand, his touch gentle despite the calluses that spoke of his hard life. I can't offer much. No home, no fortune. I don't need those things, Naomi said, lacing her fingers through his. Just your heart, whatever parts of it you can share. For the first time since she'd met him, Owen Calloway smiled, fully a transformation that lightened his entire face and reached his eyes. That, he said softly, I believe I can manage. As Owen recovered his strength over the following days, Naomi learned more about the man behind the stoic exterior, his childhood in Missouri, his service during the war, the brief happiness he'd found with Caroline before tragedy struck. In turn, she shared her own story, the struggle to maintain the small house in Fort Sumner after their parents died, her dreams of someday seeing more of the world than just the New Mexico territory. Eleanor, watching their growing closeness with knowing eyes, finally confronted her sister as they washed laundry behind the doctor's house. You love him, she said, not a question but a statement. Naomi's hand stilled in the soapy water. It's too soon to say that. Eleanor laughed softly. For someone else, perhaps, not for you. You've always known your own mind, Naomi, and your heart. What if it's just gratitude? Naomi asked, voicing the doubt that occasionally whispered in her mind. What if once we're home, everything changes? What if it doesn't? Eleanor countered, wringing water from a shirt. What if this is exactly what both of you have been searching for without knowing it? A week after Owen regained consciousness, Dr. Whitaker declared him fit for travel, though he cautioned against pushing too hard too quickly. Those wounds need time to heal fully, he warned. No gunfights or heroics for at least a month. They set out for Fort Sumner the following morning, traveling at a gentle pace that allowed frequent rest. Rebecca had already departed days earlier with a merchant wagon bound for Las Cruces, carrying with her their heartfelt wishes and a small amount of money the settlement had collected to help her restart her life. The journey home took 4 days instead of the original 2, but Naomi found herself treasuring each moment of it, the quiet conversations around evening fires, the gradual return of color to Owen's face, the way Eleanor seemed to grow stronger and more like herself with each passing mile. On their final night before reaching Fort Sumner, as Eleanor slept nearby, Owen drew Naomi away from the fire for a private conversation. I've been thinking about what happens next, he began, his expression serious in the moonlight. Naomi's heart quickened. And what have you decided? That depends partly on you, he replied. I have unfinished business with Harker and his operation. As long as they're free, other women remain in danger. You want to go after them again, Naomi said, understanding immediately. Owen nodded. It's what I do, what I've done since Caroline. But for the first time, I'm finding myself wondering if there might be more to life than hunting the darkness. "There is," Naomi said softly. "So much more." "I can't promise to stop entirely," Owen cautioned. "Not while men like Harker still prey on the innocent, but perhaps—" He hesitated, then continued more firmly, "Perhaps I could find a home base, a place to return to, someone to return to." Naomi's breath caught in her throat. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" Owen took her hands in his touch gentle yet strong. "I'm not a conventional man, Naomi. I can't promise a quiet life or freedom from worry. But I can promise to always find my way back to you, to be faithful in body and spirit, to build whatever kind of life we can manage together." "Yes," Naomi said simply, her heart too full for elaborate words. "Yes to all of it." When Owen kissed her, it felt like the culmination of a journey far longer than the miles they'd traveled together, a journey from solitude to connection, from loss to the possibility of new beginnings. Fort Sumner greeted their return with a mixture of astonishment and joy. Sheriff Wilkins, who had given up the search for Eleanor after only 2 days, had the grace to look ashamed when confronted with the reality of his failure. The town rallied around the sisters, bringing food and offers of assistance as they settled back into their home. Owen initially took a room at the local boarding house, his propriety surprising Naomi given the intimacy they had shared on the trail. "Your reputation matters in a small town," he explained when she questioned him, "and I intend to do this properly." Properly meant a formal courtship, brief though it was by conventional standards. Owen spoke with Eleanor, asking her blessing as the only family Naomi had left, then approached Pastor Miller about performing a ceremony. 6 weeks after their return to Fort Sumner, Naomi stood beside Owen in the small church, exchanging vows before a gathering that included nearly the entire town. Eleanor, radiant in a new blue dress, without silver buttons she would never wear those again, stood as witness, her eyes bright with happy tears. "I thought I would need to choose," Naomi confided to Owen that evening as they stood on the porch of what was now their home. "Between staying here with Eleanor and following wherever your work might lead." Owen's arm tightened around her waist. "And now I understand that home isn't just a place," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "It's people. It's knowing where you belong. And where do you belong, Mrs. Calloway?" Owen asked, a smile in his voice. Naomi turned in his arms, rising on tiptoe to press her lips to his. "Right here," she whispered against his mouth. "Always right here." In the years that followed, Owen continued his work, not always hunting kidnappers, but serving as a guide, tracker, and occasionally as an informal lawman when local sheriffs needed assistance. But true to his word, he always returned to Fort Sumner, to the home that gradually filled with children's laughter and the comfortable rhythms of family life. Eleanor eventually married a young doctor who came to town in 1880, setting up practice in a small building near their home. Though the memories of her ordeal never fully faded, she found joy again, pouring her natural compassion into helping her husband treat the town's sick and injured. Silas Harker met his end in 1881, not at Owen's hand as might have been expected, but at the gallows in Santa Fe after finally being convicted for his crimes. Owen attended the hanging, not for vengeance but for closure, both for himself and for the wife whose memory had driven him for so many years. On a golden autumn afternoon in 1883, Naomi sat on their porch, watching Owen teaching their 4-year-old son, James, how to whittle a small piece of wood while their 2-year-old daughter, Caroline, named for the woman neither of them had known but both honored, slept in her lap. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked suddenly, the question arising from a place of contentment rather than doubt. "Settling here, choosing this life?" Owen looked up, his eyes no longer haunted as they had been when she first met him, meeting hers with perfect understanding. "Not for a single moment," he replied. "How could I regret finding exactly what I never knew I was searching for?" As the setting sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, much like it had on that first evening when a desperate young woman met a solitary rider, Naomi reflected on the strange paths that lead hearts to their true homes. What had begun as a search for a missing sister had led to the discovery of a love that had healed them both, not erasing the scars of the past, but weaving them into the stronger fabric of a shared future. "I will bring her home," Owen had promised on that fateful day. He could not have known then that, in fulfilling that vow, he would find his own way home as well, to a place defined not by geography, but by the enduring bond between two souls who had found in each other the courage to begin again.